Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. Anbernic just released the pre-order page for their upcoming handheld. It's called the RG DS, and this is unique in some ways. To start, the handheld itself is unique. It's the first dual-screen device that we have seen from Anbernic. Instead of going towards that 3DS market like some of the high-end devices like the AYN Thor have been doing, this one is firmly focused on Nintendo DS gameplay. It's got two identical 4:3 aspect ratio displays, and it's about the same size as a DSi XL. Another surprising thing about this device is that the pre-order page is already up, but it's not shipping for about another month and a half. And this is unique for Anbernic because generally they will just show off the page, you can order right then, and it usually ships within a week. In fact, the pre-order is so far out that they don't have any review units out yet, and so I don't have one in my hands right now, but we're going to do some speculating in this video by going over the specs and talking about what kind of things we can expect from the screens and the performance, and maybe talk a bit about the hinge too. And this is kind of unique for this channel because I will do some of these speculation videos sometimes, but it's never usually about an Anbernic device. It's usually something from Retroid or AYN because they have longer lead times and they take all these pre-orders before the device even ships. But Anbernic is usually a lot better about that. In fact, over the past 5 years, every single device they've released, the dozens and dozens of them, I have actually had them in my hands by the time they go up for sale. So this is kind of a unique situation. So let's take a look at their website and their pre-order page. So there are 3 different color options. There's black and crimson red, there's turquoise blue, and polar white. And each of these colors do seem reminiscent of other color models that we've seen from official Nintendo hardware, from the DS and the 3DS and the DSi. And so yes, these are all very familiar. The button placement is your typical Anbernic with a D-pad centric control, but then also 2 analog sticks down below. If I had to guess, I would say that these are older Nintendo Switch Joy-Con style sticks, not like the more recent Hall sensor sticks that they've showed off before, and I'm getting that from the fact that in their marketing materials, they don't say anything about them being Hall sensor sticks. They do mention the fact that they have a Hall sensor magnet inside to detect when it's closing, so it'll go to sleep, and so my guess is maybe there was a conflict between the analog sticks and that magnetic sensor, and so maybe they went with the older sticks this time around. And again, a lot of this is going to be speculation because we don't have all of the information, just what we can glean from their website. Now, as far as displays, these are two 4-inch 480p 4:3 aspect ratio displays. We have seen this from many different devices from Anbernic where they have the same size and same resolution. Of note, these are touch screens, and they also mentioned that they support a capacitive stylus, but that is typical of any LCD screen, so that's not a special feature, they're just kind of confirming that. In fact, the device will ship with its own stylus, which has a disc tip to it. If you don't know anything about these types of styluses, I did a whole stylus video about a month ago. I will leave it linked down below. We'll talk more about the screens, but let's move on to the rest of the specs. So next up is the CPU. So this is running the Rockchip RK3568. And that's the first time I've seen this chipset in a handheld device, but it is also very similar, as far as I can tell, to the Rockchip 3566. And that one was the Anbernic's flagship CPU a few years back, so they had multiple devices that came out with that chip. Both of these chips have the same 4 cores, which are Cortex A55, but this new one in the RG DS is clocked a little bit higher. It goes up to 2 GHz. Older devices that had the 3566 were clocked to 1.8, so we're looking at maybe an 11% clock speed difference between the two, which I'm not sure is going to really factor out that much when it comes to emulation. So the way I'm looking at it, this RK3568 is basically just a beefed up version of the RK3566. I've got a few devices with that chipset, so we'll do some testing here later in this video. Now, the other Android-based devices that came with the older chipset, they had 2 gigs of RAM. This one has 3 gigabytes. I don't think that's going to make a huge difference when it comes to emulation, but it may make the menus and just the overall Android experience a little bit snappier. And that's probably going to help because the RGDS is going to be running Android 14, which does take quite a bit more RAM. I'm hoping that this newer Android model will make it a bit more efficient, but I also have some concerns that it might be a bit more bloated than older versions of Android. For connectivity, we've got 5 GHz Wi-Fi as well as Bluetooth 4.2, so that's going to be excellent if you want to connect this to the internet and then also to a wireless controller. It's also got a 4,000 milliamp hour battery, which I think is going to be pretty decent for a device this size, so yeah, I'm expecting 4 to 6 hours of battery life altogether. It's got a couple other features that I think will play nicely with the DS setup, including 6-axis gyro as well as a rumble motor. But it is worth noting I don't see any reference to HDMI output, and unfortunately that means that you may not be able to plug this in wired to a monitor or a TV like you can with many other Anbernic products. In fact, they mention in their features that it has wireless projection screen, which I think that just means screencasting, which unfortunately causes a lot of latency. One other design note I like about this handheld is that it has top speakers. We haven't really seen this in a lot of clamshells, and I think it's going to really help with the audio experience, so I'm glad that Anbernic went this route. And then finally, we've also got its dimensions. It's going to be 160 millimeters across, 91 millimeters tall, and then about 21.5 millimeters thick. And so it looks like it's going to be a dead ringer for the DSi XL. This one is about a millimeter in difference in size in each end. And so yes, it's going to be practically identical between the two. And the weight is going to be very similar as well. The DSi XL is 314 grams, and the RGDS is projected to be about 321. So this thing is really definitely focused on being a DS replacement, much like other Anbernic devices that have been focused on other previous products, like, their RG34XX, which was a Game Boy Advance style handheld, and then they made a couple clamshells that were also very similar to the original product. Now the retail price is going to be $100, but they are having a pre-order period that's going to make it $6 cheaper, so it's $94 right now on their website. And this is about the price I was expecting because they had been teasing it for a while now in different trailers and teasers, and they said it was going to be a sub $100 handheld, and they just squeezed it in there with $99.99. But also bear in mind that this does not include shipping, and I went through and tried to order one myself, and they were charging $25 for US customers for shipping. That's 25% of the overall product price. So the actual price of getting this to your door will probably vary, but at least as far as I can tell, for those in the US, it's going to be about $125 in the end. Now I want to talk about performance and screen, and we're going to use this Anbernic device as our example handheld since I don't have the actual one just yet. This one is the RG Arc, and this one is shaped kind of like a Sega Genesis or a Sega Saturn controller, and this one has the Rockchip 3566 inside of it, so very similar performance. It also has a 4-inch 480p display. So I think this will probably be our best analogy of the RGDS before I get it in my hands, just because the screen and the performance is going to be very, very similar. Now the Rockchip 3566, and I assume the 3568, is not a super powerful chipset. In fact, that was one of my main complaints about this RG Arc, is that it looks amazing and I want to play every Sega Saturn game on it, but it doesn't have the juice for it. And so this does not have the power to be able to play all of Sega Saturn. So what I want to do next is kind of talk about performance in terms of playing DS and potentially 3DS games on this particular chipset. And we've got a few different emulator options for Nintendo DS gameplay on Android. First, there is RetroArch, but unfortunately that does not have dual screen support, so that one's not really in the running. There's also an older app called Drastic, which is no longer in development, but does work the best with low-powered hardware. And then finally, there's one called Melon DS. We will test that one in a minute, but for now, let's focus on Drastic because I think that's what Anbernic is going to be shipping their device with. And the good news about Drastic is that it runs just fine on the RK3566 at a 2x resolution for most games. And this is the highest resolution that this emulator app supports, but yes, you'll be able to play most games just fine with these particular settings. And it is worth noting that even though the vast majority of games are going to play just fine at this 2x or high resolution setting, not every single game will. There are some heavyweight games like Golden Sun The Dark Age and Pokemon Black that are going to have some slowdown and audio stutters. As an example, here is Golden Sun The Dark Age, and I'm just running it right in the beginning of this game, and you can see that it's only running about 90% speed, and I am getting audio crackling. Now thankfully, if I drop it down to the native resolution, at least during this period of the game, it's running just fine. So there are going to be some workarounds where you may be able to play every game, but you may have to drop it down to a 1x or native resolution instead of that high resolution setting. And the game will certainly look chunkier. After all, this is what the original DS looked like, but it is nice that you still probably will be able to play most games on this app. So I think in terms of DS performance with the RK3568 running the Drastic emulator in particular, yes, I think it's going to be just fine. There might be a couple edge cases here and there, but I think overall, DS development has been out for a long time and you most likely will be able to play most games. is. Now, Melon DS is still currently in development, and they're adding new features all the time. In fact, there's a new fork of it that is made for dual screens, and they just added custom shaders and a couple other fixes. But unfortunately, Melon DS is quite a bit more demanding than Drastic, and so even putting this at the native resolution and the most potato-like settings that I can, it was not running anywhere close to full speed. In fact, even with a lightweight game like New Super Mario Bros. 2, the average frame rate that I was getting here was about 35, maybe 40 frames per second. So this is only running at about 2/3 speed. And the way I see it, even if the RK3568 chip that is in the RGDS is, about 11% faster in terms of clock speed than the one I'm testing with right now, that 11% is not going to overcome this big gap. So personally, I don't think that Melon DS is going to be a very viable solution when it comes to playing Nintendo DS on either of these chipsets, the 3566 or the 3568 that's going to be in the RGDS. And that's a bummer because Drastic not only stopped development, but it was also closed source. So we're not going to see additional feature updates to that particular app. We're just going to have to deal with what we have. Now, in one of their teaser videos, Anbernic showed off Nintendo 3DS gameplay, and I was pretty skeptical about this knowing what I know about these chips. And even in the games that they were showing off, which are particularly lightweight, they were having some audio stutter, so I figured, yeah, this is probably not going to be up to snuff when it comes to playing 3DS. So I tested 3DS on Citra MMJ, which is the most performance-minded app that you can find for Android to play 3DS games. So this one uses a lot of hacks and other workarounds in the background to make these games run the best that they can. And unfortunately, again, it's only running at about 2/3 speed at a native resolution. And so I think that even if there is a clock speed difference between this chip and the 3568, it's not going to be enough to overcome it. And New Super Mario Bros. 2 is not a heavyweight game by any means. In fact, this is one of the early testing games that I do just to make sure that 3DS is even playable. And the fact that this is running so slowly is not a good sign. So my takeaway here is that only very few 3DS games are going to be actually playable, and I would not recommend buying this in the hopes of playing any 3DS. So when it comes down to it, I think the chipset on the RGDS is going to mostly limit you to Nintendo DS gameplay, and of course you'll be able to play a lot of other classic favorites. If you want to play NES and Super Nintendo and PS1, all those are going to play absolutely fine on this chipset as well, and you have the ability to use two screens if you want to pull up like a guide or anything else like that. All that's still going to work, but specifically when we're talking about DS and 3DS emulation, you are going to be a bit limited to basically just Drastic for DS and really not anything else. Now, another valid concern about this device are the screens, because they're going to be a 480p resolution, which is a 2.5x scale of the original Nintendo DS. That means it's not going to be a nice perfect integer scale. We've kind of seen this happen before from Anbernic. So they made the RG35XX SP. I really love this handheld, but it does not have the same resolution or scaling of a Game Boy Advance. Instead, it's just a standard 480p display, very similar to the one in the RGDS. So this is going to be a nice all-around display, but it's not a perfect Game Boy Advance integer scale. Later on, they released the 34XX SP, which does happen to be an integer scale of Game Boy Advance. So this one is a much more ideal Game Boy Advance experience, but this is not what they released right in the beginning. And so there are some valid concerns that this particular display is not going to look great when playing Nintendo DS, especially if you want it nice and sharp. So I did take some footage looking at different screens and how it looked at just the regular standard non-integer 2.5x scale with no filters or shaders. And this is what it looks like right here. I can definitely see that the pixels are not perfectly balanced, but for me, it doesn't look half bad. And by default, Drastic is going to apply what they call a linear filter, which essentially balances out the pixels, but does make it a little bit smoother and softer looking. And so this is what it looks like with the default settings, where it does have that linear filter applied. And this does seem more balanced to me, but also a little bit softer. And here's a comparison of those screens side by side. On the left, we have it without any filter at all. And then on the right, we have the linear filter. And I do think the right side does look more balanced and pretty decent if you ask me, but it does make the overall image a little bit softer. Here's another look, same setup, where I have on the left no filter and on the right is the linear filter. And yes, I think the right one looks more balanced, but the left one looks crisper. And I think for most users, this image is going to be fine, either the left or right side, and you have that choice. Personally, I think I would probably go with the right side, even though it is a bit softer. I do like that it looks a little bit more balanced. But there are also a lot of DS fans out there who want to have a perfect upgraded experience where the screens are going to look better, the performance is going to be better, they can upscale. But unfortunately, I think that the RGDS is going to be a compromise when it comes to the screen, because you'll probably have to apply different shaders to get it to look good. And personally, I would say that I lean towards more that pixel purist kind of perspective, and honestly, after testing it today on the RG Arc, I didn't think it was half bad. Here's another example with Mega Man ZX without a filter running, and the life bar, as you can see, is nice and balanced. I'm sure there are definitely imbalanced pixels here, but at least to just the naked eye for me, this is at least playable. Here it is again with that linear filter, and I think this still looks very good. A little bit more balanced and rounded overall, but it also has that softer overall feel. Again, I think personally I would probably just play it this way. So even though I definitely do like to have balanced pixels as well, at least in my testing here today, I didn't find huge faults with it here. I would definitely still consider this to be playable. It's not a perfect upscaled experience, which I think would probably look even better, but in general, I would say this at least looks decent. One nice thing about Drastic is it does allow you to load up custom shaders, and there are custom shader options out there. One of the benefits of this app being around for, almost a decade at this point. I'll leave a link to a GitHub repository down below that has a bunch of custom shaders, including a sharp bilinear one. And so there may be options within here to get something that looks pretty decent, and I bet that the community will come up with other solutions too. So in the end, when all is said and done, I kind of was also very skeptical about how these screens were going to look when playing Nintendo DS games, but in general, just at least in my own testing here today, it's not been half bad. It's not going to be perfect, and I think it could definitely be better, but it's not as bad as I was worrying about when looking at the numbers alone. So putting it all together, I think that for casual users, the screen is going to be absolutely fine, and for other users, they might be surprised to find that this actually doesn't look half bad when playing in Drastic. At the very least, we've got those custom shaders to play around with to potentially find an even better solution. And then finally, one last note is about the hinge, and that's just another concern that I have because, any hinge-based device has this moving part to it, which, gives me some concern that it won't last over time. But I will say that among all the companies that have made hinge-type devices over the past couple of years, Anbernic have been the most solid, at least as far as I'm concerned. Some of their early transparent models did have hinge cracks, but I would say the number of reports I've seen from the Anbernic models with hinge issues is a lot lower than from Retroid as well as Miu, so I think they've got a pretty good track record, all things considered. Anbernic also does a pretty good job of copying other people's homework, and so I think that, because they modeled this after the DSi XL, I'm hoping the hinge will be pretty solid. Okay, so putting this all together based on what we know from their website as well as Anbernic's track record with their other releases, I would say that, some of my major concerns here are going to be performance, and we probably are going to be stuck with the Drastic emulator with this particular chipset. I have some concerns about the screen as well, but it honestly was not as bad as I expected once I actually tested it. So I think it'll be okay for casual users, but power users probably aren't going to like it. And then finally, the hinge is just kind of up in the air. We're not really sure about that, but always a topic of concern because it is a moving part in a handheld. So at the end of the day, my recommendation would be that even though there is a $6 discount if you pre-order it, that's not really worth that risk because we haven't seen this chipset in the wild just yet. So I have no idea what the performance is going to be like, but just based on similar models, it's probably going to be pretty limited. I'm going to see what I can do in terms of getting the best performance out of this screen as well, but if you are a pixel purist, the resolution here is not going to line up to an integer scale. So putting it all together, $100 to $125 is still quite a bit of money for just one handheld that's going to be focused on Nintendo DS gameplay, especially with this many unknowns. So my recommendation would be to wait for reviews to come out. I will get mine as soon as I can and make my full in-depth review, but as it stands right now, yeah, I would exercise caution and not give in to FOMO. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation here, but I think we've got some good information so far. As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found it helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.